we do have with us Dr. Professor Mowadat Rana. Dr. Rana is one of the leading psychiatrists and cognitive scientists in the country, one who I very closely consult on so many different matters, professional, personal, and all such matters. And my question to Dr. Rana, while we were discussing a lot of these things, was does disinformation or malinformation practices affect human agency? And if it does or if it doesn't, what does that do to a societal well-being aspect? So Dr. Rana, the floor is yours, and please let us know what you think.
Okay, let me start with a bit of a disclaimer and then also make a claim. Disclaimer is that deeper scientific aspects of the world of internet and all that it is doing to human society. So I wouldn't really be able to say a lot from a technical angle on that. But the claim, if I may say, is that I have something to do with journalism. And the first thing is that I've been an editor of a journal, which was a scientific journal, but that makes me a claimant, nevertheless, for more than 10 years or so. I can tell you that what are the things that we struggle. Okay. Three things that every journalist that I've talked to or come across talks about. And the first always in that is freedom of the press. Absolutely. And I'm a great believer of that. But somehow the discussion doesn't really move further to also include, in my opinion, two other paradigms that are crucial in my understanding as regards journalism is concerned, that with freedom, you are also harbingers of trust in the society and of truth in the society. Now, if you now start to look at journalism within this triad of freedom, trust, and truth, I think many issues are going to be sorted out, provided you emphasize as much as you do on freedom of the press. Let me highlight to you two sayings that are very, very close to my heart, and I'm very, very fond of them. So I thought I'd bring them up for the audience here to listen to them. And first one comes from the good old Maxim Gorky, and he said, "Freedom is the first 5 minutes in which I was born to cry naked, nameless, without sin, without directions, and without human grudge." That's all the freedom for you ever. So, I mean, it's so difficult really to actually be living in a space that you can truly call freedom. Most of the stuff that we actually jealously guard against is the stuff that have been handed over to you by some authority figure in one's life from the very inception. And 5 minutes is that what he has put this duration to be. Then, of course, is a journalist, one of the most influential journalists in the history of journalism, and her name was Oriana Fallaci. Now, I don't know, Krish, have you heard this name before, or any of our audience there?
I haven't. Maybe Razeshta Osama or Dr. Najma Sadi. Razeshta has. Razeshta.
Yes, sir. Okay. Okay. Oriana Fallaci was famous because Zulfikar Ali Bhutto at that time, which included Fatim that she had interviewed, including Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. And then she wrote this little thin book, which to me is one of the finest books that I've read. And the book's name was Letter to a Child Never Born. It's a very catchy title, so I picked it up and I started reading it. And in that came these 4 lines that I'm going to read to you. And she said, "For has any human the right to give life in a world where survival is violence, freedom a dream, justice a fraud, and tomorrow a yesterday?" It just shook me when I read those lines. How true? I mean, in a word that she has described for all of us, I think the idea of freedom and truth and trust has to be taken with a pinch of salt to start with. So idealism aside, in the practical word, actually to live in the present and to think of the future and how the technology is going to influence us and a human being and human society in general. We need to probably become a little more pragmatic and realistic about the expectations that we have of the media in general and the damages that they can potentially do. Now, from purely a psychiatric perspective, let me touch upon for our audience the importance and significance of trust, first of all. Trust in human beings is of 3 kinds. Now, that is important so that you can dissect phenomenologically the way media is going to actually sort of play with your trust or influence it. If you phenomenologically understand what trust potentially is, then I think it will make our life easier in the subsequent discussion. The first kind of trust is essentially the one that we are born with, the instinctive trust. Now, when you're born as a human, you have this trust that the smile that is going to be there, or the cry that I'm going to exhibit on arrival into this world, is going to bring in a whole lot of people around me to hold me, caress me, make me warm and feed me, and I can trust them with my life. Now, this is an instinctive trust that a child is born with. How that trust is then subsequently handled by the society is a completely different subject, and I'll not tackle that at this point in time. The second type of trust is essentially the emotional trust. Emotional trust is the one that we have based on our bonds and our relationships and our love and affection for people. Since we love them, since we care for them, so we start to trust them. How that trust is betrayed or not betrayed or actually nurtured is then yet again a separate subject. But what is probably the most important from a media perspective is the third type of trust. And that trust is essentially acquired, and that is the intellectual trust that all human beings start to trust data. If somebody gives them data and they say, okay, these are 10 rupees, then they would see it as 10 rupees, as an authentic 10 rupees to start with. Now, how that 10 rupees is now going to sustain itself, or that note is going to sustain itself in the market, is going to authenticate the degree of trust in State Bank of Pakistan and in people to start with. If it continues to behave differently, that by the end of the day, that 100 rupees has been reduced to 90 rupees, my trust in State Bank, my trust in the person who's given me that 100 rupees note is going to be shaken. Therefore, the trust of an intellectual type needs authentication all the time. It needs to be authenticated. And what is it going to be authenticated with? Well, it is going to be authenticated by truth. So everything is what it seems it is. If it doesn't look like that, and then it is fake, then this intellectual trust of mine is going to gradually start to undermine my emotional trust. And then that in turn is going to be undermining my instinctive trust. Now, if I'm making any sense at all, remember the intellect actually controls our emotions, or is expected to control our emotions and our instincts, amongst human beings at least. So therefore, this trust that people have on media sort of cuts very deep into a human being. And let me also highlight to you that some of the mistrust that human beings develop is of epigenetic type. Epigenetic here would mean that if I continue to live in a world and produce children in a world full of mistrust at an intellectual level, this mistrust is going to be now transmitted through the genes into the next generation. And that's the whole epigenetic or transgenerational phenomena, that the environment can also, as much as the genetics can influence in our intelligence and other aspects of life through our genes, the environment in itself can also influence the genes. And there's this bilateral flow of the two. So imagine the importance and significance of truth in of the media, because it will gradually develop a degree of integrity in a society. And integrity here only means that everything is what it looks like to be or is supposed to be. So that 100 rupee note is actually a 100 rupee note. And therefore, I think it's very, very important for the media to understand the reality and importance and the damages that it can potentially do if the truth does not prevail on its pages, whether they are on the internet or in print media. Now coming to the importance and significance of truth then. So we've covered trust, but let us now, we've covered freedom, but then let us go on to what is truth truly from a psychiatric perspective. Well, truth from a perspective or a phenomenological is based on physical laws. Now, I'm not going to delve into more biblical aspects or of the Quranic truths, etc. No, I'm not going to touch upon that. I'm no expert in that. Purely from psychological phenomenology, we have truth that is the physical laws, the 8 laws of physics, which are essentially describing how particles will behave, how atom particles will behave, how neutrons will behave, and so on and so forth, and how forces are going to interact with each other, and what is fission and what is fusion, etc., the laws of physics. They are the truth. Everything else, which is three-dimensional and can be touched and appreciated through our sensorium, would only be true if it merged with laws of physics. If it didn't, well, physics does not believe in miracles. So there are no miracles. As far as laws of physics is concerned, it bans the importance of physics. Then, of course, the second truth is, which is the metaphysical truth. Now, metaphysical truth is probably less binding and less, let's say, straitjacketed as laws of physics are. And that metaphysical truth is that it does not talk of laws, instead talks about principles. It says that there are principles that can be changed and suited so that human condition can evolve if it adheres to those principles or decides to part with them. So these principles of metaphysical nature do not straitjacket human society, and they let people think beyond the prescription of the principles of metaphysics. So that is truth from a phenomenological angle. Now, what are then, of course, the challenges or psychosocial conditions that challenge truth, freedom, and trust? First of all, remember what media offers to people, whether on the internet or through news, in print, or on television, provides the raw material for thinking. In technical terms, we call it the pre-thought, the raw material with which we think. Our thoughts are made of images that are generated through speeches of other people, through the content that comes to human mind, and it comes usually now largely because of the number of hours that we spend in front of a screen from the screen itself. And therefore, remember, you are now going to influence me with my thoughts through the pre-thought raw material. Now, if you would give me cotton, I will not be able to make a woolen shirt for you from that. So if the pre-thought or the raw material that the media is going to give me is going to be fake, whole thought process is going to now generate probably delusions, false, unshakable beliefs, because the raw material that came into my head was fake. So the product cannot be true. So therefore, imagine a society living with fake news generating delusions, where it truly be a mad, mad, mad world. And who would have done that? Those who produce that raw material as the pre-thought. The quality, the purity, the pristine nature, the practicality, the utility, and the importance of the pre-thought, therefore, is very, very important while we are discussing the role of media in our life and in terms of our intellectual growth as a society. Now, remember that people, low intellect, there are people with moderate intellect, and there are absolute geniuses out there as well. And the impact of the pre-thought is going to be variable on all the three. Whereas a human brain might be very competent if it belonged to a genius to actually decipher the raw material, which is fake, from the real. Well, that will be only a very, very small percentage of the society. Maybe 2% of the society would have that intellectual capacity to sort. Rest coming from the 67 to 70% of the average mind will not be able to sort the fake from the real, unless pointed out. And that relatively lower intellect will gradually then breed more and more cultural idiocy, confusional state. And once a society becomes chaotic and confused and cultural idiots, you can well imagine how then it is going to be a heyday for the people with fake news and those who are making this pre-thought raw material for us. What will happen? The result is going to be, if you're going to have fake news or unauthentic news or untruthful raw material serving human brain, it is not going to sort of stop at producing cultural idiocy. It will continue to generate the next state, that state in the mind beyond cultural idiocy, and that is unbridled emotions. Emotions that can be normal and regular, but when unbridled can be absolute disasters. For example, fear. Now, fear is a normal human emotion. Sadness is a normal human emotion. Anger is a normal human emotion. Disgust is a normal human emotion. But when unbridled, when set in a mind with cultural idiocy at play, a low intellect at play, is a recipe of disaster. A society that is now going to have unbridled fear, unbridled sadness, unbridled anger, unbridled disgust is going to do what you see people doing on the streets in this country. They will take somebody up the 8th floor, throw him down on the street, come all the way down and set him on fire. And it will be just not an example of cultural idiocy, it would also be of unbridled and poorly controlled emotions. Far beyond that, when you will put all these unbridled emotions of fear, depression, anger, and disgust, the recipe is going to make more dishes for you. disgusting dishes of jealousy, bigotry, paranoia, prejudice, lust, and you name it. And all these unfortunate poisonous dishes are going to completely take over the society, which is going to have rampant jealousy, bigotry, paranoia, prejudice, and lust in the society. Now, combine that with poverty, insecurity, chronic pain, anticipatory threat of living in a country which has enemies all around except one side, a hostile environment from within and a hostile set of neighbors. Well, you can imagine that no sooner we are likely to become delusional, psychotic, in my understanding, very, very sick. So my concern as a psychiatrist is that what I deal today at an individual level are the illnesses that I've just named. Imagine a whole society going psychotic, a whole society feeling depressed, a whole society which is delusional. Remember, therefore, that media has a bigger responsibility to keep the society sane. And for that, they would probably have to understand the importance and significance of freedom, trust, and truth. Thank you very much, Piyush.
This was fantastic. I mean, the epigenetic part of it, I mean, that just blew me away. I never in my life I would have imagined that mistrust can be carried forth in a DNA. And it could go from one generation to the next generation. And so we are so oblivious with the sort of society that we're living in. And you get to deal with that on a daily basis. Thank you, Dr. Rana. Thank